Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Yoga Karmasu Kaushalam.
Hello students, my name is Ishan Shonalekar and today we will be discussing about cardinal utility analysis. Let us start with the objectives of this session. First we understand introduction to utility theory. Then we establish the cardinal utility approach. Further we look at the law of diminishing marginal utility. We look at consumers' equilibrium for a single commodity, consumers' equilibrium for multiple commodities, and the derivation of demand curve before ending the session with limitations and criticisms. So, earlier you have studied the analysis of demand generally. In this case, we are going to see a particular aspect called cardinal utility theory and which will follow the same logic of demand curve, law of demand and the overall demand analysis. It is just an extension. First, we understand introduction to utility theory. First we have the concept of utility. Utility is the satisfaction, pleasure or benefit that a consumer receives from consuming goods and services. It represents the fundamental concept that explains why people make certain choices and help us understand consumer behavior in markets. Think of utility as happiness or contentment you get from eating your favorite food, wearing comfortable clothes or using a smartphone. This satisfaction is what drives people to spend money on different products and services. Let us look at the different types of utility. First you have form utility. This occurs when raw materials are transformed into finished products that consumers find more useful. For example, cotton becomes more valuable when it's made into shirts or bed sheets because it can now satisfy human wants or needs directly. Then we have place utility. It is created when goods are moved from one place to another, that is from where they are produced to where consumers need them. A smartphone manufactured in China becomes more valuable when it reaches the store in your city because you can now go and easily purchase it. Then we have time utility, which happens when goods are made available at the right time. Ice cream has a higher utility during summer, while warm clothes provide more satisfaction during winter. So, wherever we come across the word utility, you just replace it with the satisfaction given to you by a certain commodity or a service. Storage and preservation create time utility. Possession utility is the satisfaction that comes from owning something. The moment you purchase a book, it becomes yours, and this ownership provides you with utility beyond just reading it. Let us look at the historical development of this concept. The concept of utility was first introduced by philosopher Jeremy Bentham in the 18th century. He believed that people naturally seek pleasure and avoid pain, and that this could be measured and compared. Later, economists like William Stanley Jevons and Alfred Marshall developed these ideas further, creating mathematical frameworks to analyze consumer behavior. The utility theory helps explain why people make trade-offs, why they are willing to pay certain prices, and how they decide between different products. It forms the foundation of modern consumer economics and business strategy. Let us look at the cardinal utility approach. The cardinal utility approach assumes that utility can be measured in exact numbers, just like measuring weight in kilograms or distance in kilometers. According to this approach, we can say that eating one apple gives exactly, let's say, 10 units of satisfaction, while eating an orange gives exactly 15 units of satisfaction. In some books or in some texts, since you are calling them numbers, they are also called utils instead of units. So for example, one particular apple gives me 10 units or 10 utils of satisfaction. It is just another name given to a numerical representation. The core idea of this theory is that you can represent the satisfaction that you derive in terms of a particular number. This approach makes several key assumptions. First, it assumes consumers are perfectly rational and always try to maximize their satisfaction. Secondly, it assumes that utilities from different goods can be added together. If an apple gives 10 units and orange gives 15 units, consuming both will give you exactly 25 units of total satisfaction. This approach also assumes that consumer preferences remain stable over time and that people have perfect knowledge about their own satisfaction levels. While these assumptions may seem unrealistic, they help create a simplified model for understanding consumer behavior. Let us look at the key concept in this topic. Total utility represents the complete satisfaction a consumer gets from consuming a certain quantity of goods. If you eat 3 apples in a day, your total utility is the sum of satisfaction from all 3 apples combined. Marginal utility is the additional satisfaction that you gain from consuming one more unit of a good. It's that extra happiness or satisfaction, we can say, which you get from eating the 4th apple after already having 3. This concept is crucial because it helps explain why people sometimes stop buying more of something even when they can afford it. The relationship between total and marginal utility is fundamental to understanding consumer behavior. As you consume more units of a good, your total satisfaction increases, but each additional unit typically adds less satisfaction than the previous one. Let us look at the aspect of measurement in units. Cardinal utility theory measures satisfaction in hypothetical units, as I already said, called utils. Think of utils as units of happiness. 1 util equals 1 unit of satisfaction or happiness, you can say. This measurement system allows economists to compare different levels of satisfaction and make predictions about consumer choices. For example, if watching a movie gives you 20 utils of satisfaction while reading a book gives you 15 utils, the theory predicts you will choose the movie when given an option. While utils don't really exist in reality, they provide a useful framework for analysis. Now let us look at the law of diminishing marginal utility. Let us look at the statement and the explanation. The law of diminishing marginal utility states that as a person consumes more units of a good, the additional satisfaction from extra unit decreases. In simple terms, the first slice of pizza is extremely satisfying. The second slice is still good but less exciting, and by the 4th slice or 5th slice you may not want anymore because initially you are very hungry and then your hunger is satisfied. So the level of satisfaction will go on reducing for every additional unit, you can say. This is a very simple and vague example. This law is one of the most important principles in economics because it explains many consumer behaviors. It tells us why people diversify their consumption, why they don't spend all their money on just one product, and why demand curve typically slopes downwards. Now let us look at why this law works. So first is psychological reasoning, that is, the desires are naturally limited. Once we start satisfying a particular want, our craving for more of the same thing decreases. Your thirst is strongest when you haven't had water for hours, but after drinking 2 glasses, additional water provides much less satisfaction. Then we also have physical limitations. Our bodies can only consume so much. After eating a large meal, additional food might even cause discomfort rather than pleasure. This physical constraint naturally leads to diminishing satisfaction from additional consumption. Then we have multiple needs. Humans may have different needs and wants. One need is partially satisfied, other needs become relatively more important. After buying enough clothes, you might prefer to spend money on entertainment or education rather than more clothes again. If we look at the real world examples, then consider your daily coffee consumption. The first cup in the morning might be absolutely essential and provides enormous satisfaction. The second cup might still be enjoyable, but by 5th or 6th cup you might feel jittery and get little additional pleasure or even negative effects. Similarly, when you are shopping for books, the first book you might buy might give you greatest satisfaction. The 10th book purchased on the same day might provide you much less additional happiness, especially if your budget is limited and you are giving up other things that you need. Now, what are the exceptions to this law? While the law generally holds true, there are some interesting exceptions. For collectors, each additional stamp or coin might provide increasing rather than decreasing satisfaction as their collection becomes more complete and valuable. Money itself can be an exception, especially for people who are very poor or have a strong desire for financial security. Each additional dollar might be just as valuable as the previous one or even more valuable if it helps achieve an important financial goal. Addictive substances often violate this law. Instead of providing less satisfaction, additional consumption might increase the craving and the perceived benefit, at least in the short term. The fourth topic, that is consumer equilibrium with a single commodity. Consumer equilibrium is a point where a consumer gets the maximum possible satisfaction from all their purchases given their limited income. It's like finding the sweet spot where you are happiest with your choices and wouldn't want to change your spending pattern at all. For a single commodity, the equilibrium occurs logically when the satisfaction that you get from the last rupee spent on that item equals the satisfaction you could get from spending that rupee on anything else. Meaning, if you would have spent that amount on something else, you would not have been better off in terms of happiness. In other words, you have reached the point where spending more or less on this item would make you worse off overall, and there is nothing else that exists which would make you better off. The key principle is that marginal utility per rupee spent should equal the marginal utility of money itself. This sounds complex but is actually intuitive. If spending one more rupee on apples give you more satisfaction than keeping that rupee or spending it somewhere else, then you would buy more apples. If it gives you less satisfaction, you would not buy more apples and you should buy fewer apples. This continues until you reach a point where the satisfaction from the last rupee spent on apple exactly equals the value you place on money itself. At this point, you have no incentive to change your consumption. You are in equilibrium. If you are not in equilibrium, you would naturally want to adjust your consumption. If movies are giving you more satisfaction, for example, per rupee than other things, you will watch more movies and spend less on other items. This shifts your consumption until you reach an equilibrium point. This adjustment process happens automatically and consumers make choices. You don't need to consciously evaluate utilities. You naturally move towards the combination that makes you happiest within your budget constraint. Now let us look at the same idea of consumer equilibrium with multiple commodities. This is called the equimarginal principle. When choosing between multiple goods, consumer equilibrium follows the equimarginal principle, also known as law of maximum satisfaction. This principle states that consumers should allocate their spending so that the marginal utility per rupee is equal across all the goods. That is, now you don't want to reduce the consumption of one, take money out of that and increase the consumption of another good. So you are at a situation where all the goods and the money that you are spending provide you exactly the satisfaction that you need. If you need 3 apples, you are having 3 apples. If you need one movie, you are watching one movie. But if you are ending up getting, let's say, 5 apples and not watching a movie, you are not in equilibrium. So you would not want to spend that amount on 2 additional apples, reduce the consumption to 3, the amount that is in your pocket you go and spend on movies. This brings the law of equimarginal utility as an example. So you can also think of it as balancing your satisfaction across different type of purchases. As I said, if you are getting more satisfaction per rupee from food than from entertainment, then you should spend more on food and less on entertainment, or vice versa, until the satisfaction per rupee equalizes. This principle explains why people don't spend all their income or money on just one item even if they really love that item. Diversifying spending across different goods typically provides more total satisfaction than concentrating all spending on single good. Why this maximizes satisfaction? So the equimarginal principle maximizes satisfaction because it eliminates all opportunities for improvement. If any other good provided more satisfaction per rupee than others, you could increase your total satisfaction by spending more on that good and less on the others. Only when all goods provide equal satisfaction per rupee have you squeezed every possible bit of happiness from your limited budget. This is the fundamental logic behind consumer choice theory and explains many real world spending patterns. Let us look at the derivation of demand curve from this theory. The cardinal utility approach provides a logical foundation for understanding why demand curves slope downwards. The connection works through the law of diminishing marginal utility and the consumer equilibrium condition. When the price of a good falls, consumer needs less marginal utility from that good to maintain equilibrium with their money's value. Since marginal utility diminishes with consumption, they will consume more units to reach a lower level of marginal utility. This creates the inverse relationship between price and quantity that we see in demand curves. Let us look at the logic behind downward sloping demand. Consider what happens when the price of your favorite snack decreases. Initially, you are in equilibrium, meaning the satisfaction from the last unit consumed justified its price. When the price dropped, the same last unit now provides more satisfaction per rupee than before. This creates an imbalance that motivates you to buy more. As you consume additional units, the marginal utility is going to decrease due to the law of diminishing marginal utility. You will continue buying more until the marginal utility falls enough to restore new equilibrium at a lower price. Let us look at individual versus market demand. Individual demand curves show how one person's consumption changes with price. Market demand curves show how total consumption by all consumers change with price. Market demand is simply sum of all individual demands, as we have seen earlier as well. Understanding individual demand through utility theory helps explain market level phenomena. When prices fall, not only do existing customers buy more, but new customers who could not afford the product at higher prices may also enter the market. However, there are certain limitations and criticism to this entire cardinal utility theory. Let us look at those. The most fundamental criticism of cardinal utility theory is that utility cannot actually be measured in absolute numbers. Cardinal utility theory assumes that consumers are perfectly rational, have complete information and can instantly calculate optimal choices. In reality, people often make emotional decisions, have limited information and use mental shortcuts rather than detailed calculations. Further, cardinal utility theory is static and doesn't account for how preferences change over time. People learn from experience, develop new tastes and adapt to different circumstances. The theory also ignores social influences, advertising effects and cultural factors that shape consumer behavior. Modern economics has largely moved beyond cultural utility or cardinal utility or ordinal utility theory, which only requires that consumers can rank preferences rather than measure them precisely. This approach is more realistic because ranking is something people actually do. If we look at the current relevance, despite its limitations, cardinal utility theory remains valuable for understanding basic consumer behavior principles. It provides intuitive explanations for why demand curve slopes downwards, why people diversify consumption, and why consumer surplus exists. If we look at the educational value of this, for students of BBA particularly, cardinal utility theory provides an accessible introduction to consumer theory. Its concrete approach with measurable utility makes abstract economic concepts easier to understand before moving on to more sophisticated approaches. Understanding this theory also helps students appreciate why economists develop alternative approaches and what problems these new theories solve. It provides historical context from evolution of economic thought and consumer behavior. While modern economics has moved beyond cardinal measurement, the basic insights about consumer behavior, diminishing marginal utility, and equilibrium analysis remain valuable to understanding markets and making business decisions. So, for business students, understanding this will provide a broad overview and base to understand further theories like indifference curves and ordinal theory in order to assess how consumer behavior functions. I hope you understood and enjoyed the session. Thank you so much.